It's busy out there, folks. It's busy this time of year, closing out. Well, say closing out the school year, but we know keeps going into the summer. I just say that because, we're in education. We have to have some level of busy out there, folks. It's busy. Well, thanks, guys, for hanging out with us today. We have a great conversation on a really, really important topic that we all appreciate and deal with every day. So I can't wait to get into it, and we have a great guest today. So I'm going to hold on to it a little bit. I'll give folks another minute to join us. Welcome, Patricia, Jenny. We've got members of the Mizzen team here. I'll wait for maybe a couple of other people before I throw in an opening question for us. Just like a nice little way to bring people in, break the ice, although it's very warm out there in some places. So sorry, I had to do a dad joke. Had to do it. For Jenny and Patricia, let us know where you're coming in from. Drop in, let us know what part of the country.
I'm from primetime Palm Beach County.
Okay. Awesome. The home of Suzette.
Yeah, I think you were our speaker last year, weren't you, on our symposium?
You know what? If it was bad, it was not me.
No, it was you.
Yeah, that was a great time. I missed it this year. I know y'all had a great one this year too. Our good buddy Aaron Dworkin, I know he noticed y'all. So, the king of summer. Yeah. All right, Johnny. I know we're going to introduce you formally, but how you doing today, man? We're going to have a great combo. Yeah.
I'm ready. Lori just asked if this was my band. Not quite. My band is a little heavier than that.
Yeah, I got some social and emotional metal.
Honestly, a lot of our music is about mental and emotional health, coping skills. It's funny. People don't think metal has lyrics about that stuff, but if you look, there are bands who are really passionate about it.
Okay. All right. Very cool. All right, folks. So I'm going to have a little opener for us before Johnny and I have our combo. It is May, Mental Health Awareness Month. So we're having this time in honor of this special time of the year. And part of mental health is joy, right? And sometimes joy can come from simple and some might dare say even silly things. And so let us know what simple thing or things, let's keep it to one thing. A simple thing that brings you joy as of late. I'll give you an example. And it's not these bracelets, although they're cool, but Apple released the coolest watch face. Where there's like an animation of Snoopy, a different animation of Snoopy in Woodstock every time you lift your watch to see it. Like right now, it's Snoopy sitting down, getting ready for school. It is just such a cool thing. So whenever I'm on edge a little bit, I just kind of check Snoopy out on my Apple Watch. It's a simple thing. Some might say it's a silly thing. But yes, that brings me joy. I see coffee on here as a simple thing. Yes. Some people even sometimes compare, wine and coffee, which is harder to make. I definitely feel you on the coffee part. Okay, good stuff. Let's see what else we have on here. What other things? Okay, 20-second hugs. 20-second hugs. That's a long hug. My oldest, my 17-year-old, we have this thing where we just kind of do a headbutt because she's not a big hugger. So we'll just headbutt as a sign of affection. So, but yeah, folks, simple things that bring us joy, finding new music. Netflix. Yeah, when that show finally comes on Netflix is great. I'm actually really excited because today, Dune 2 on Ultra HD or 4K is released. Actually, it was released yesterday, and I'm getting it today. So it's one of those things I did not want streaming. I wanted the disc. So anyway, folks, simple things that bring us joy. Welcome to our series on Mizzen Meets. And folks, for folks who are visiting us for the first time, Mizzen Meets is become a tradition here at Mizzen. And it just really was born from this us being out in the field and out in the country at conferences, meeting really cool people. And in over time, those cool people, we connect and talk, and over time we figure out, hey, we've got something here. Let's have a Mizzen Meets conversation. So these are very organic. They're not necessarily pre-planned in terms of who we're going to talk to. It just kind of evolves over time. So we're really, really glad that we have a great guest today. And for folks who don't know who Mizzen is, or like my colleague Haley, who's on now, will say, what is a Mizzen? Mizzen Education, we are a group of individuals dedicated to bringing free out-of-school time resources in the form of lesson plans, activities, curricula via our digital hub or platform, and through these really cool professional development experiences. Now, some of you have experienced as we've toured the country and participated in many conferences. So we are dedicated to the practitioner. We are fans of the practitioner. We are practitioners ourselves. And so joining me is my colleague Haley, Kristen, Janine. And if I don't see other members of the team on here, I know Angelina, Alex are all members of our team, Sarah, and our good buddy Kyle. So we are only a snapshot of the broader Mizzen Education crew. So we all welcome you. So I'm grateful that you're spending these 60 minutes with us. And so I'm going to introduce right now, because he's been sitting patiently with his really cool background, to the one and only Johnny Crowder, founder and CEO of Cope Notes. And I'll talk to you all about Cope Notes in a minute. But I met Johnny at a National Summer Learning Association conference in October of 2022. And we were all in a Jazz at Lincoln Center workshop, which is one of our content partners. And part of the workshop was to create a blues song using the A-B kind of like music theory concept. And so this gentleman writes this piece, and he volunteers to sing it alongside some jazz musicians. And that was Johnny. And I nicknamed him Johnny Blues after that, right? So every time I see him, I call him Johnny Blues. So Johnny, brother, welcome to our Mizzen Meets moment. It's good to have you, man.
Thank you for having me. I'm trying to remember the actual lyrics, but I remember the theme was something like, um, you can't keep people in your life forever, no matter how bad you want to. And it was sort of like this letting go of people. To be clear, the prompt was like, make it bluesy, like something sort of soulful and a little somber. And I'm like, I guess it's like the hardest. Oh yeah, it was like the hardest part of growing up is accepting that not everyone is meant to be in your life
Right.
forever or
That's right.
something.
That's right. Yeah. So when you got up there and you did that, all of us were like, whoa, this dude is cool. And lo and behold, we found out much more about him. And so we'll give you that space to share a little bit about yourself and about Cope Notes. But I also want to say that for Johnny, I typically wear a polo, but for Johnny, seeing that he's t-shirt cool, I had to rock a t-shirt. So I am actually wearing one of our partner t-shirts in Arts Connection. They became a content partner this year. This was actually designed by a student. This is a still of a video that was transformed into a airbrush design for a t-shirt. So we did a blog post on them. So I know Haley's going to put up their stuff on our chat. So that is a little bit about Arts Connection. But Johnny, tell us, brother, about yourself. Where are you joining us from? A little bit about you and your background. And finally, how did Cope Notes come to be?
Okay. I call this the 30 years in 30 seconds question. So I'll do my very best to catch everybody up.
Yeah. Yeah.
I grew up in Tampa, Florida, where I live today, with severe mental illness in an abusive home. So, like, rough start. And then I did not want to get involved with treatment at all until high school, when I actually ran away from home. And then I was voluntold to go to treatment. And so I went to treatment, and then I eventually went to school for psychology because I was really curious about what was happening in my own brain, and then started working with behavioral health organizations, and then founded a company called Cope Notes. I did not know it was going to be a company. I just wanted to build a machine that could text people health education content and improve their mental health. That's what I wanted to do. And then over the past 7 years, it has become a company.
And the origins are really, really cool because and we'll post this either now or at the end of the video. You have a great TED Talk that you did about 4 years ago, 5 years ago. It's got a great number of views. I enjoyed it. And one of the things that you said was that you started leaving little sticky notes for yourself all over the place. So talk to us about kind of like that, what led to that moment where you were literally writing notes, the original analog cope
Yeah.
notes to yourself back then, right?
Yeah, I was like I said, I went to school for psych, and then even after I graduated, I would still read about psychology quite a bit. And I was reading about how easily impacted the brain is. Like everything that you experience, everything you read or hear or see makes an impact on your brain, sort of an impression. And I thought, well, what happens when I watch a horror movie? It's like an hour and a half long impression on my brain of like darkness or violence. I'm like, oh man, like I wonder if the opposite is true. So I started reading and I found out that actually exposure to positive stimulus does change your brain in a similar way. So I was like, I want to create these little micro moments of interacting with content that will be a positive influence on me rather than negative. So around this time in my life, I like stopped saying curse words. I haven't said one in like 10 years probably. Um, I also stopped watching like horror movies or like violent things on TV. And I started purposely trying to surround myself with things that were positive. And this started by literally writing a psychology fact or advice or encouragement or something on sticky notes and then putting them in my shoes and in frying pans and like anywhere that I think I could come across them and feel surprised by them. And it really was making a difference.
That's awesome, man. And you mentioned obviously the concept of mental health, and we're gonna get into this a little more. And for folks joining us, the perspective that we're taking on in terms of mental health today is for the practitioner, for you as the educator and the adult. Obviously, some of these things also extend into the young people that we work with, but we want this time to be for you, right? We want Johnny to share kind of his journey, his approach, his thoughts, and his expertise on the concept of mental health for us as youth development professionals. And so Johnny, we talk about Mental Health Awareness Month in the month of May. In your kind of like in your expertise and your experience, what is mental health? Because we hear about it, people talk about it, they say the term. It might mean different things to different folks, but for you, what does mental health mean?
I call it, this might be a little too utilitarian, but I call it your brain's ability to function properly. So just like, engine health, I can't count how many times I've been driving my car and not thought about the engine at all. You really only think about your engine health when you hear a clang and you're like, oh my Lord, please God, let there not be something hugely wrong. And I think most people approach mental health like that too. In their general life, we probably don't think a lot about our mental health. It's only when we feel hyper stressed or hyper anxious, hyper depressed that we focus on it. But if you actually think about using the car example, we do all sorts of things for engine health. For example, an oil change, that is engine health. All of us do it. We might not classify that as supporting our engine's health. And I think the same is true for mental health. We don't often consider sleep or reading or coloring or a night spent with a friend just catching up. We don't think of those things as supporting our mental health, but all of them actually do.
Yeah, that's a great point, Johnny, because I know that mental health can carry almost like maybe a stigma, maybe it has a certain reputation with folks when they hear the term. And we live in a really busy world. It's fast, it's busy, it's increasingly automated. How do we become more self-aware in terms of the clangs, the sounds, the things that our mind is telling us? Because we can gloss over these things. We can keep moving and go, that was nothing, right? It's just the brakes squeaking. I'm sure it's just maybe some sand in the brakes, right? Like, how do we stop and really become more self-aware and engage?
Yeah, so in my first TED talk, I talk a little bit about habituation, which is the brain's tendency to tune out information that it thinks it's already processed. So if your refrigerator makes this weird whining noise, it's probably not going to tell you every time. Your brain is going to go, I already know it makes a whining noise. I'm not going to mention anything, which makes it really difficult to identify when something is happening in our life that maybe isn't ideal, but we've gotten so accustomed to it that we tune it out. So, what I always tell people is if you ask a friend, like imagine, let's use back to the car example, forget the refrigerator. You're in your car and your friend gets in the passenger seat and they go, what is that smell? And
Mm.
you're like, what? I don't smell anything. And they're like, that smells like oil, dude. The interior of your car smells like oil. And you think, well, it always smells like this. It takes an outside perspective to help knock that loose. And what I always encourage people to do is if you don't feel that you currently are very mindful about your own mental and emotional state, if you ask your partner, if you ask your coworker, they will tell you. If you ask them and just say, hey, have you noticed anything different about my mood lately or my spirit or the way I talk to people? Um, they will tell you. And I think you'll be pleasantly surprised to find that the people around you actually notice these things and have a vested interest in helping you improve them too. But you don't know unless you ask.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. And I think relationships are a big part of us being more self-aware. And for folks who are listening, I'd love for y'all to share, one of two things. Either what does mental health mean to you? Like, how have you come across it? How do you define it? And what are some things that you do to just be more self-aware? And there's this silly thing, Johnny, and I was debating whether or not I wanted to share this because I know we're pressed for time in 1 hour where there's so much we could talk about. But my daughter's gotten back into basketball, and I used to play it all the time. And so I've been playing more lately. Not necessarily against other people, because if I come home injured one more time, I don't think my wife's going to let me back in the house. Right. So
I think our health insurance premium is going too high because you keep balling.
that's right, man. So I just go out and I practice. I shoot, I dribble, I just, just to keep some of that kind of muscle memory. But one thing that I notice is I go out and every day at the end of my workout, I try and shoot 10 free throws in a row. Right. And part of that is like I want to see if I can actually sit with myself and make and focus on making 10 without all this stuff coming into my head. And last night I tried, Johnny, and I tried, and I could not. The best I could do was 8 in a row, and I was getting upset. I was getting distracted, and so to me, that almost serves like a sign of how is my mind? Can I concentrate for a few minutes on this particular thing without all these things coming into our mind, right? And you talk about mental health being this thing of like these thoughts turning off, mitigating against, silencing. What has been your experience in that development of just like making your thoughts captive, right, and engaging with what you're thinking? Like, what is that? What has been your experience? And what advice do you have for us?
So first, I will share. I have a bunch of different diagnoses that are directly related to this. So one is obsessive compulsive disorder, and I'll just pick one more: ADHD. So if you take obsessive compulsive disorder and ADHD, you have a brain that is inundated with thoughts that it's not trying to think. Like I will be looking at Carlos and my brain will sort of jump off onto these other trails and have like 45 different thought patterns. And I have to like pull. Have you ever seen a video of somebody pulling a plane? Like a
Mm-hmm.
strongman competition where they like
Yeah,
have
I've seen that.
chains around them and they're
I've seen
pulling
that.
giant.
Yes.
That's what it's like for me to pull these thoughts back. I'm like, come on, guys, please. I'm talking to Carlos right now, please.
Mhm.
And what's really interesting is that the act of interrupting thought patterns is basically the best ammo you have to retrain your brain. It's less about whether or not your mind wanders and more about how quick you are. I've read in this book, they call it the gap. It's the gap between you having a thought that you're not trying to think and you corralling those thoughts back into where you want them to be. So, for example, I grew up with really bad anger issues. So the gap would be the time between the stimulus, like the moment that I got angry, the thing that made me angry, and my return to baseline. So what I focus more on is less about trying not to get angry, because I think sometimes you get frustrated with yourself. Dang, I'm angry again. And I focus more on like making the gap smaller, decreasing the amount of time it takes me to get back to where I want to be.
Yeah. And when we think about this idea of being self-aware, having strategies, obviously we have an audience that has young people, like they're looking right at us, right? They're watching our every move. They're trying to model some of even though they might say we're not cool, they're looking at us, right? We may not be cool, but they're still looking at us, which is, I find that really ironic, funny. But they're looking at us to model behavior. Why is this idea of mental health so important for folks in this work, right? Youth developers, positive adult influences, facilitators, mentors, however you want, coaches, educators. Why is the mental health work so important for us in this space?
I was on a panel yesterday with this doctor, and she said that they did this study. I don't know the name of the study or anything, but she was telling me about this study where they showed photos of people with certain facial expressions, and they showed those photos to an adult and to a child. And the adult and the child, not just these two people, they showed them to adults and children, and they found that there was a trend for adults to interpret facial expressions and body language completely differently than children do. So I think what adults do is they say, I'm going to hide my stress. I'm going to hide my anxiety. I'm going to hide my depression. I'm going to go to work and I'm going to work with these kids, and none the wiser. No one's going to have any idea what I'm going through. And I think it's wrong on two levels. Number one, kids are way more intuitive than we give them credit for. And two, their interpretation of your inflection, your tone, your word choice, the way you stand and your posture, all of these things are different from your own. So if you tell yourself, yes, I'm dealing with a lot of challenges, but I'm not going to bring them to work, I think it's actually not only are you costing yourself that dissonance between your actual experience and the version that you're trying to portray to the people you work with, but also you are you're basically fooling yourself, because these kids can pick it up. So sometimes people ask me, like, I work with groups of educators a lot. Like I'll go do trainings for public school districts or something. And these people will say, what is the best thing I can do to support the mental and emotional health of my students? I'm like, the best thing you can do is take care of your own and model correctly what it looks like to process stress or anxiety. You don't even have to use the words, but kids see the way you react. The last thing I'll say is, I punched holes in the wall of my childhood home, punched through the wall of the home. And I didn't think of that idea. I saw the way that other men in my family expressed their masculinity. I had this definition. Nobody told me, Johnny, when you become a man, the way you express anger is you smash things and raise your voice. Nobody ever told me that. I saw it. So that's why I always tell people, the behavior that you model for these kids will stick way longer than the way that you ask them to behave.
Such a great point, Johnny. And folks, for folks who are listening, if you can just indulge me with this, what is the most surprising thing, for those of us that have engaged directly with young people, what's the most surprising thing that you've heard a young person tell you about you that you were surprised, like you were caught off guard? And I'll give you an example. Yeah, I was in Mammoth Mountain. Mammoth Lakes is it's the Eastern Sierras. It's a well-known mountain range here in California. We were doing a multi-day workforce kind of like career development retreat for high school students. And so we spent 4 days together, and it was an amazing time. And at the end of the 4 days, we did a reflection piece. And a couple of students said something that was very surprising. They said, you know, we were observing you guys as a team, and you came across as like a family. Like you were the corny dad, you were the cool uncle, you were the stern, you know, auntie. They kind of noticed these roles and how we worked with each other, and they made a comment about that. And so I found myself just really surprised that they were paying that level of attention, and they were linking relationships and our dynamics with one another as adults. And so to me, that was really surprising. And so for folks who are listening, what is one thing that you've heard from kids, from young people about you and your disposition, about the way you work, about the way you carry yourself, that was positive and caught you off guard? Or have you been critiqued? Right? Maybe for shouting, maybe for doing something that set an unsafe environment, which would take a lot of courage for a young person to say that. But Johnny, I think your point is well made, that we have this, even in our imperfection, we have this thing where we need to model, even in not being perfect. One thing you said that I know, I've come across a lot of adults who enter. Oh, actually, let me go back. I've heard this statement: don't walk into someone else's stormy weather, right? We've all got our own emotional weather. And sometimes we can walk into someone's rain or storm and just storm with them, and just be kind of drawn into that chaos. What advice do you have for us as adults as we engage with our own social and emotional well-being in spaces where there's chaos and conflict and tension? Like, how do we as adults keep composure? What are some things that we should be asking ourselves or telling ourselves when the day is over or before we walk into those spaces? How do we prepare ourselves for moments like that?
Yeah, I've part of the reason why I created Cope Notes was because, so I'm a certified recovery peer specialist, CRPS. What that means is that I use my lived experience with mental illness to support other people who are living with similar challenges. This means that for a long time, I would do in-person, one-on-one or group sessions with people who were really struggling. Dude, this was some of the hardest work I have ever done in my life. I was sitting down with people. Keep in mind, I'm working really hard to maintain my own recovery. And then I go sit with someone who's maybe their experience is reminding me of a couple years ago when I was facing some challenge. It was really difficult for me to spend an hour with somebody who is where I was. I would feel like almost sucked back, and it would be hard for me to like climb out afterwards and go have a normal day. And what I had to remember is, if my intention is to support this person, I always thought that the best thing to do would be to climb down into the hole with them and empathize so they feel that there's someone with them. And I've actually seen an illustration once of it was shared by another peer recovery specialist, where they were showing this illustration. It was kind of like a comic book illustration, where someone's stuck in a hole and they can't climb out, and they're like, help, help, help. And then a certified recovery peer specialist comes by and they're like, oh, I'll help you. And then they jump down into the hole, and then they're both just sitting there together with their arms crossed. And then a few minutes later, they're both like, help, 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 because they need someone to pull them.
Yeah.
And it's a great reminder that you can empathize with someone, in that you can understand where they're coming from and seek to really connect with them and not force them to get out. But if you also get into that weather, it becomes a near impossibility for you to pull them out. And eventually you'll both need help. So it's actually this really challenging thing that you have to keep in mind, when the tendency is, I want to get down in there. I want to get in the dirt and in the muck with this person, have them feel understood. You have to balance that with, if I stay outside of this pit and I reach my arm down and pull them up, we're both better off.
Hmm. So I definitely want to engage the audience here with some Q&A, right? So folks, just I'd like to open up the floor in a moment, whether it's you ask the question of the chat or you come off mute and you have a conversation with us. But I know, Johnny, that humor is a big part of just feeling better, right? And I talk about this silly Snoopy, I mean, watch face and um, as adults, as we grow personally, as we engage with our own emotional state as professionals, what is the role that humor plays? Like, how do we, whether it's laughing at ourselves, trying to find humor in some of this, these are difficult times, right? There's a lot of things that are kind of coming together for this for our society and this generation of kids and this generation of practitioner. When we think about what happened in 2020 with the pandemic, and now we fast forward to some of that same class of student that did not get their graduation in high school. Crazy thing is, with some of the protests that are happening in college campuses now, some of those graduations are being disrupted as well. So they've experienced this kind of sandwich of series of big events that are so this is a crazy time. So how does humor show up, in a cope note? How do we laugh at ourselves a little bit? How do we maintain some levity?
Yeah, a few points here quickly. I actually pulled up my Cope Notes admin dashboard. I want to read you a few text messages that are actually related to laughter.
Perfect.
One is laughter attacks stress hormones and replaces them with ones that boost your immune system. Are you maxed out on vitamin C? Watch some stand up instead. That is fascinating to me. The idea that, so real quick, this text points out two separate things that laughter does that I think is really powerful. It not only reduces the production of stress hormones, which is, by the way, anytime your mental or emotional faculties are impaired, your decision making is impaired, most likely it's because of an overproduction of a stress hormone in your brain. It's basically blocking all the pathways. So not only does laughter attack those stress hormones, but it also helps generate ones that boost your immune system and promote health. So that's just one thing that I think laughter doesn't get enough credit for. We talk about laughter like we talk about humor like it cheapens a challenge that somebody has gone through. And keep in mind, I have survived suicide, I have survived severe abuse, debilitating illness. I spent over a decade in treatment. I mean, my life is so bad, or was so bad, Carlos, that people fly me all over the world to tell them about how bad my life was. So I'm certainly not saying that, like, oh, if things aren't so bad, then you can laugh about them. And then when things are really bad, you can't. And I'm certainly not saying I laughed about things right away. It took a lot of time for me to think and process. But the real line that I draw with laughter is that it is not that I am cheapening. I use humor in every single keynote I give. Every time I get on stage, I use humor. And what I feel that it does is it takes the thorns out of the whip. Like if I'm already being harmed by something, it's sort of like slowly de-thorning the thing that's hurting me. It still hurts. I mean, these memories that I have of challenges that I've faced, the family emergencies, the illnesses, of course, those things were still challenging. But applying humor to them or using these things to create art, and comedy is art, it sort of it weakens the sting. And I think it helps, at least me in my experience, it helps me reclaim some of the power. Like, imagine if somebody holds a gun to you and says, give me all your money, and you go, oh no, what am I going to do? Imagine, just hypothetical experience, someone points a gun to you and says, give me all your money, and you laugh. That villain is robbed of his power. He's like, what the heck? I have a gun. Don't you see I have a gun? Give me all your money. And you laugh. He's like, what am I supposed to do with this? That's the way I visualize applying humor to challenges that I've faced. It's not that the villain goes away and that magically he disappears. it's that it disarms the villain.
Yeah. Great point. It's almost like when a stand-up comic cracks a joke about a current event, and then he'll say, "Oh, is it too soon? Is it too soon to crack this joke?" Right? A similar effect. But folks, we definitely want to hear from you. What are questions that you have around mental health, yours in particular, or some of the things that you've noticed, or questions that you have about Johnny's journey? You can just, if you can drop some questions in the chat, or if you can come off um, mute and join us, that would also be super cool. So I'm going to check to see what we have in here. If folks have any specific questions. I have questions, so don't worry about that. But I want to know if you have questions about anything in particular related to this topic. Yeah.
Yeah, it looks like there's a question from Janine and Jenny, if you can see those.
Okay. Let's see here. So Johnny, Janine asks, when you're feeling down, how do you get out of it? Do you have special places for notes on demand? That's an interesting one.
So for Janine, for the notes on demand, that's what Cope Notes is for. So I strongly encourage you to check that out if you haven't yet. As far as feeling down and getting out of that, something that I do that I've actually, this is a new strategy, so it's working so far for me, is accepting that every moment, or sort of recognizing that every moment is one of one, and soon it will be over. And all I will have is the memory of that moment. So I'll tell you how I learned it quickly and how I apply it. So I don't know if you've ever done an ice bath, Carlos.
No, just my ankles, not the whole body.
Dude, I was at this wellness conference last year. They had an ice bath, and they let exhibitors could go do 3 dips or whatever of up to 6 minutes, and it was comped because it was part of the like exhibitor package or whatever. So I go in, and or I'm about to go in. I talk to the guy who runs it, and I say, "What's the strategy? Like, am I supposed to like try to like make my body real hot inside, or do I tell myself that it's not cold and like convince myself that I'm on a beach somewhere?" And he goes, "No, that's how I see most people fail the ice bath, is they're either in complete denial, which, like, your body's not stupid, it knows that it's cold, you can't tell it that it's not cold, and also don't try to like make your body hot." Like, he said that I've thought about this almost every day since he said this to me. He goes, "When you get in the water, your body will tell you that you are dying because it is cold. So if you try to tell your body that it will be hot, that it is hot, and actually you try to trick your body, it's not going to work. Your body is smarter than you." So he says, what I recommend people do is you get in the water and your body says, "You're going to die." And you say, "No, I'm not. I'm cold. I'm actually colder than I've ever been. And that's why I think I'm going to die, because I'm in the coldest water I've ever been in my life. But I do know one thing: 6 minutes from this exact moment, I will not be cold because I'll get out. This is a finite period of time where I will be deeply uncomfortable. And then all I will have is the memory of having been cold. So do I really want to spend this 6 minutes pretending that I'm not cold when one day all I'll have is the memory? I want to experience this. So I've applied this to challenges in my life since then, where, for example, I was getting my throat tattooed. Extraordinary pain. It felt like they were cutting my head off. It was brutal. And I thought to myself, I wish I could tell myself it doesn't hurt. I wish I could tell myself that I actually tense my neck, and then that'll make it hurt less. No, this hurts. This hurts. It is uncomfortable, and it is finite. And tonight, when I'm driving home from the tattoo shop, I will not be getting tattooed anymore. And all I will have is the memory of having been tattooed. And I try to apply that to any challenge that I face where I think, This is a one-of-one moment. I'll never get to feel this again because it is guaranteed that my brain will change, my life will change. So I almost try to accept and soak up the challenges, and it makes them dissipate faster.
Johnny, that's and thank you for the question, Janine. I hope that answered your question. Because it leads right into Jenny McClure from Austin, Texas, her question around how we can best support our young people in the element of mental health. I mean, outside of necessarily a curriculum in particular, I think your point of these things are finite. And for example, I've been sharing that my daughter has had a difficult junior year. Her AP class workload has been a challenge. And there have been moments, and I shared this in my LinkedIn post from a few days ago about how grateful I am for the work around social and emotional well-being, because I've seen my teenagers go through a series of both, whether it's relationship related, um, school culture related, which by the way, my daughter, my youngest, her end of year project, Johnny, and I think part of it is inspired by you because her and I have been talking about you, is that she put together this beautiful, and I'll send it to you when it's done, a beautiful video and research on how middle school culture affects teen mental health. That's her end of year project. And so she was inspired by her own struggles to do this as part of her end of year work. And so this idea that these moments of difficulty, of challenge, of heartbreak, of pain, emotional or physical, that these are finite moments, and for young people, they think it's going to last forever, right? So I think it's an interesting thing that you bring up. But to Jenny's point, what are some of the best ways we can support our young people regarding mental health outside necessarily of a curriculum, although those are always important and they're part of an overall strategy. But what would you say is part of that solution?
Yeah, Jenny, this is going to sound like I'm trying to only answer with things that I do, and that's not the way I'm trying to approach this answer. There's a reason why I do two things. I run a company that provides daily mental health support to people individually via text message, and then I do speaking and training about mental health. I choose to do these things because they are two of the by far the most impactful things I've ever seen or experienced in the mental health world. And keep in mind, I've been doing this for a long time. I gave my first keynote 14 years ago. I've been running this company for 7 years. I went to school years ago. So this is it. My life is centered around helping people improve their mental and emotional health. And the reason why I choose to run Cope Notes and come and speak and train is because those are the two things that move the needle the most. So my answer, even if you don't use Cope Notes as a resource, I still think getting a digital resource into the hands of everybody that you're working with, not just the people who are actively struggling with a diagnosis, is huge. What that means culturally is not this is for Carlos because he's having a hard time. It's this is what we do. We are Mizzen. We prioritize mental and emotional health. It's for everybody. So that's one thing, is getting a digital resource into the hands of everybody. And this is a one-to-one resource. I'm separating these on purpose. A digital one-to-one resource that's not tied to other people, so they can have this individual experience with this resource, but then coupling that culturally with having a session, either flying somebody in to do a keynote or a training or doing a virtual session. I work with youth all the time on stuff like this. Having somebody do a group session where you're having a conversation, doing activities, this combination is what works best. I'm telling you from experience, because you have the people who want to have the mental health experience insulated from everybody else. They want to be very private about it. They get to have that. And then the people who are much more comfortable in a group get to have that. And then both cohorts of people get to enjoy the other side. So it's the peanut butter and jelly of a mental health strategy, is a small distributable one-to-one digital resource. and then a broader in-person cultural statement that you can reference from then on.
Jenny, thumbs up if you feel that answered your question, or you can just let us know in the chat. So thank you, Johnny, for that practical advice. We have a couple other questions. This is from Lori, and she asks about where do you think we are with stigma? There was a moment for recognizing mental health as integral to health, but that seems to have since snapped back to older outmodel views or outdated views. What do you think? Is there still a stigma connected to this?
Yeah, it's pretty funny. I see what you saw, Lori. So I was doing mental health advocacy before it was cool. So like in 2011, I was like, mental health is important. Everyone's like, yeah, we don't want a session on mental health at our conference. So this was like in the before times. And then during COVID, it became, well, not immediately, by the way, speaking from experience, there was a good lag period where it was like everyone was slicing employee benefits and everyone was just focusing on the dollar. And then there was sort of this lagging effect where like late 2020, early 2021, it was like Justin Bieber's tweeting about depression and Selena Gomez is starting a mental health nonprofit. It was like, okay, now it's kind of cool culturally. And then I do kind of sense that everyone's like, well, anyway, back to normal life. And I think that first of all, I do think that there's still stigma. Second of all, I think it's half of what it was a decade ago, in large part because a bunch of famous people are tweeting about it, which is great. I don't think that actually is the whole solution. Like sometimes Justin Bieber will tweet something and then collectively we all pat ourselves on the back like, oh, depression is solved because Justin Bieber tweeted something. So I think that that's part of it. The awareness is way broader than it was 10 years ago. I also think COVID forced people to recognize that you don't have to live with a mental health diagnosis to prioritize your mental health. So that moved the needle in a great way. I think the most important thing that you can do in your position is to I call it the broken record effect. I want you to be consistent with your mental health messaging. So what I see all the freaking time is they'll fly me in for a keynote for Mental Health Awareness Month. And they're like, oh, happy Mental Health Awareness Month. In honor of Mental Health Awareness Month, we're having a mental health expert come in. We're going to do this exercise. And then June 1st comes around, crickets. And then for 11 months, freaking nothing's happening. And consistency is really important because if someone's actually going to feel comfortable enough to speak up about what they're going through or engage with a mental health resource available to them, they don't want to be the first person to bring it up. They don't want to be the 10th. They want every single Monday to be, oh, yeah, that's right. We do mental health Mondays every Monday. Or like, oh, yeah, in our employee newsletter or our parent newsletter, there's always the mental health call out. Only then, when they see that it is a cornerstone of your culture, will people actually feel comfortable speaking up about it. So I'm a huge fan of consistency. It doesn't have to be one big thing once a year. I would far prefer one small thing each day or each week or each month to reinforce the idea that you don't just care when it's convenient.
Great point. Thank you, Johnny. And Patricia, I want to get to your question, but I do want to extend this topic a little more, Johnny, because and it connects to Lori's question. In out of school time and in enrichment, we used to have this phrase called disguised learning, and it's not really cool anymore, but it was back in the olden days. We call this idea of learning academics through enrichment, right? Disguised learning. What are ways that maybe we are already doing mental health work, but we've not really called it that? We may have disguised it, whether it's intentionally or just, we're just doing it without really knowing it. What are ways that we can continue to implement mental health strategies in our weekly meetings, in our interactions with one another, especially as we are virtual, remote, and not necessarily, in the physical space together? What are things that we can do, or what are ways that folks are doing this work that you've seen that is not necessarily, they may not call it mental health, but they're doing some of these strategies?
Yeah, one thing that comes to mind, this might not be the most popular one, but it's one that I adhere to. Not everybody likes it, but when someone asks me, "How are you?"
Mm.
I can't say good, how are you? I can't do it. I have like an inability, even if you were like, Johnny, I'll pay you $1 million to just say, fine, how are you? I can't do it. I have to tell the truth. And so many people, specifically thinking of professional environments, were sort of trained to say, good, how are you? Fine, or not bad, or could be worse. All of these are absolute BS answers. There's no truth to them at all. What my employees give me crap about this because we'll log on to a meeting together and they'll be like, "Good morning, Johnny. How are you?" And I go, "I am." And then I spend 20 seconds trying to think about how to
Mm.
tactfully and accurately answer that question. And I really think if you have a 30-minute meeting with someone and you ask them, how are you? And give it a second. Like, I really want to know if you had to pick a word, if you had to pick an emotion, how are you? And sometimes I will go, I am relieved that I had time between my last meeting and this meeting to fill my water bottle and use a restroom. And that little stuff like that, if you talk about like mindfulness in the workplace, you might not categorize this as like a mental health practice, but it's something I hold dear because I try to be very careful with my words. And when I was growing up, my parents would say, Crowders don't lie, cheat, or steal. And I consider a half truth to be a lie. So if you ask me how I'm doing and I say, fine, how are you? I
Mm.
ignored your question entirely. So just taking that question seriously is just one small, simple thing you can do culturally that you'll see is contagious. When you answer this question this way, you'll see other people who watch you answer that question that way also put in that same amount of, because after I answer, I'll go, how are you? They'll go,
Mm.
huh, and just taking that extra 45 seconds really changes the tone of the meeting and the culture as a whole.
I think we use the term authenticity, right, in the workplace kind of loosely, because if we really want to get authentic, right, yeah, it's gonna get real. And I don't think folks are ready to go, okay, let's move on to our next agenda item, right? If we're gonna get really authentic. So I think there's a lot of soul searching to do when it comes to connecting with each other in this authentic, mindful workplace situation or setting or practice. And it could be that maybe our meetings or our times together need to be thought of differently in terms of how much time do we allocate to each other? Do we jump into business right away? Are we ready to engage with someone not doing okay and sit with that for a little bit, right? Those are, yeah.
Yes. Carlos, you just made me think of there have been times where I'll get on a call and someone like is visibly, they seem like they're frazzled or they're stressed out. And I will say, can you just be real with me for just a moment, Carlos?
Mm.
Would it make a difference for you if you got this half hour back and we met another time?
Mm.
Like, would that be helpful for you? And I swear, I've had this happen 12 million times where someone goes, Johnny, that would make so my daughter just threw up. I actually have a huge presentation I'm about to do. I'm just between two things. And I go, don't even worry about it.
Mm.
I'll email you tomorrow with a reschedule link and we'll meet later this week, next week. No worries. Giving people that time back, I think, is one of the greatest, most generous things you can do is showing that mercy and grace in the workplace.
That's awesome, man. Great stuff. Great stuff. We're just getting warmed up, folks, and the hour is already upon us. And I appreciate everyone else who jotted down some on the chat flow here. Some great practicals on how to be authentic, how to maintain a level of mindfulness in the workplace. I do want to get to Patricia's question, and she asked, "You're wearing a cross chain. Does your faith play a role in your mental health and well-being?"
Totally. I wish we had time to talk more about this. I grew up in a death metal band called Dark Sermon, and we were signed to Nuclear Blast Records in Europe and E1 Music in the US. We toured hundreds of shows a year, different city every night. And our merch had pentagrams on it. And we were like, oh, all of our lyrics were like anti-God. So I'm the last person that you would think would wind up developing any sort of faith. And that's a whole separate, very interesting conversation to have. But I will tell you that the way that it has impacted my mental and emotional health is before I knew that there was a God, I thought that I was the center of the universe. Like I was my own God, basically, or there was no God. So I was the most important person in my life, which meant that what other people think of me is paramount. It means if I am failing mentally or emotionally or physically or professionally in any of those areas, the whole world was failing because that was my lens. And once I recognized that I wasn't God, I wasn't the center of everything, the most important person in the world, that there was someone, something significantly larger than me that I could turn to for help, someone or something that cared about me, and learning that if I fail, that doesn't mean the rest of the course of human history is screwed. Just having that pressure taken off of my shoulders has been extraordinarily liberating. It is one of the most consistent and beneficial fountains of hope that I've ever discovered in my recovery.
Awesome, Johnny. Thank you so much for sharing that. And great question, Patricia. Couple of minutes left. I do want to have folks just hear some practicals, right? So Johnny, we've talked some, we shared some great insights here today. In your How to Grow as a Person TED Talk, you talk about these, there wasn't a magical moment where your mindset and habits changed. You call them a series of microscopic steps. So with that spirit, what are some steps that folks can walk away with or take, right? What steps can they take today from this conversation to continue to grow as an individual and support and improve our mental health?
I'll tell you a couple really, really quick ones. The first is pick somebody right now and tell them about this conversation today. Accountability is crucial. Once you mention it to somebody else, now it's real. Now there's a conversation. So even if all you do is tell them about this conversation and that's where it ends, that's a huge step. So pick somebody right now and share about this last hour with them. And then the other thing I'll say is this is going to sound too small to make a difference. But I guarantee you, speaking from firsthand experience, it makes a huge difference. Each night, make the last thing you do when you crawl into bed to write down one positive thing that happened during the day. Most people, when they get into bed, their brain automatically recaps the day and is worried about a bunch of things that haven't been completed, and then is concerned about what's going to happen tomorrow. A way that you can help your brain close the loop is writing down. I write 10 at the end of every night. I write 10 things that happened that day that I'm grateful for. I've been doing it for years, but I started with one. So when you get into bed, make the last conscious thing you do that day, writing down one positive thing from the day. This will help your sleep. It will help your moods. It will help your productivity. It'll help your relationships. I'm only telling you to do this because it has slowly but surely transformed my life.
Awesome. Awesome, Johnny. Thank you. And I'm going to add this quote from your TED Talk, and we'll close with this. If we consistently interrupt our old thought patterns with new ones, and we resist the urge to judge ourselves for how long the process of personal growth takes, we won't waste our lives waiting for a eureka moment that might never come. So so this plays right into this idea of being patient and kind to yourself and to ourselves. So Johnny, thank you so much, brother, for an amazing time. Folks, thanks for joining us. Visit Mizzen.org for a collection of 12 great activities and lessons that are inspired and endorsed by Mr. Johnny Crowder on social and emotional well-being. I hope that this month you continue to reflect and that you prolong this and extend this into your year regarding mental health and positive social and emotional growth. So thanks, folks, for joining us. Then we'll catch you on the Mizzen front. Team, thanks so much for putting all this together. And Johnny, again, brother, Thank you for your time. And I know that we're going to continue this journey and this conversation. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, y'all.